just one other question, Chair Powell, on this immigration and labor supply question. So one of the euphemistic ways in which economists, I think, sometimes talk about labor supply and immigration is they'll say something to the effect of, well, an increase in labor supply has put downward pressure on labor prices. And what they're effectively saying is that increased immigration has put downward pressure on the wages of American workers. I wonder, when you hear sort of your colleagues and other economists outside of the Fed talk about the influx of immigration and the fact that it, I think, admittedly has put downward pressure on wages. Okay, so there obviously that has put some downward pressure on inflation, but it also puts downward pressure on the wages that people earn to pay for their families. Why do we see that as a good thing? Or maybe that's wrong. Maybe the premise is fundamentally incorrect. But why do so many economists treat an influx of new labor as a good thing? If labor is constrained, labor supply is constrained, doesn't that lead to rising wages for American workers?
So I'm certainly not trying to put a value judgment on it. I will say that this is all happening over the last couple of years in a context of an extremely tight labor market, now a little bit less tight, significantly less tight, but you've got a worker shortage, you've got businesses who have jobs that are open, you have, more than one job opening for every unemployed person. So you've got a very tight labor market, and it's addressing that, and we're having wage increases are still very high, but they're coming down to a more sustainable level.
Fair. And Mr. Chair, I know I'm over time. Could I just one more question on this? Thank you. I understand your point, Chair Powell, and again, I'm not ascribing value judgments to you, but if we say we have a really tight labor market, and we say that there are more than one job openings per worker, there are two ways you could plausibly solve that, probably more than that, but two obvious ways you could plausibly solve that. One is through a new influx of workers via the immigration system. Another way is by raising wages and bringing some of the workers that are on the sidelines. I think specifically of the 7 million prime-age men that have dropped out of the labor force. Like, why isn't that more the focus of policymakers? Rather than, you see a labor shortage, rather than bringing in a large number of new immigrants, why not try to boost wages in a way that brings some of those workers off the sidelines? That seems to be a much better focus from my perspective.
Certainly, that's a very constructive focus. I would agree. It's not. I don't think it has to be one or the other.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Van Hollen from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, it's good to see you. And let me first applaud you and your team at the Fed for, at least so far, being on track to bring down inflation without, so far, triggering a surge, big uptick in unemployment. But you know very well that that's a risk if the Fed does not act with full awareness of that danger. When you were here in March, you said that you were, quote, well aware, unquote, of the risk to unemployment of waiting too long to cut rates and, quote, very conscious of avoiding it, unquote. Since then, we have seen a slowing in the economy and a rise in unemployment. I'm just reading something today, an analysis with Diane Swank, KPMG's chief economist, who summed it up by saying, quote, the ice is thinning, red flags are emerging for the U.S. economy, unquote. The engine of the economy, the labor market, is cooling faster than previously known. The unemployment rate is above 4% for the first time since 2021. It is taking workers longer to find jobs. Economic activity in the service sector, which is responsible for 2/3 of economic growth, slowed in June. So my question, Mr. Chairman, is how do you take all of these factors into account? Do you share my concern that as of today there is a real risk of an increase in unemployment larger than is currently on your radar screen?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I do, even more so than in March when we were here, see that. So we've seen, and I think the latest data show that labor market conditions have now cooled considerably from where they were 2 years ago. And I wouldn't have said that until the last couple of readings. And I would say also that for a long time, the risks were more that we would fail to hit our inflation target. I think the risks as to the two statutory targets we have, price stability and maximum employment, I think those are coming much more into balance. My colleagues and I are looking at that, and we fully understand that we have to manage this process of administering the federal funds rate and deciding what to do with it in a way that manages both of those risks. And, you know, the two mandates are equal under the law, and so, yes, we do get that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the fact that you've seen that change.
تسلا طاير يا جماعة. تسلا طاير يا جماعة. أنا ما كنتش بصراحة متخيل إن النهاردة تسلا يوصل ل $260، لكن واو، إيه ده؟ ما شاء الله.
Unemployment, and that if we allow that to go too long, we may see a real uptick there. And so I'm pleased that that is very, very much on your radar screen, and hope that that will be a really deciding factor as you and your other Fed colleagues determine what to do with respect to interest rates. And as has been said in the housing sector, we are seeing the continuing drag created by high interest rates. So that has been I think all of our colleagues, as you probably heard today, are really hearing from our constituents, understandably, about the very high housing prices, and it's slowed investment in other sectors like manufacturing as well. In my final minute, I would like to turn to the question that Senator Warren asked, because I asked your colleague, Vice Chair Barr, about exactly this question of implementing Section 956 of Dodd-Frank when he was before the committee just a short time ago, May 16th of this year. And I asked him about why the Fed had not moved forward along with other agencies with respect to implementing what the law is and what the law has been for 10 years. NCUA has signaled their intent to propose a rule. The SEC has indicated that they're moving forward. I said to Vice Chair Barr that I've not seen any notice of proposed rule from the Fed, and can I get a commitment that the Fed will quickly begin the process implementing this law by issuing a notice of proposed rule? His answer was, and I'm quoting, "In discussions with my colleagues, it became apparent that at the board, we believe we need to conduct some further analysis before deciding what steps to take. We are committed to following the law, to implementing Section 956, but we have further work to do." Count me among those who are very frustrated that we're now 10 years after this law was passed. Vice Chair Barr committed to following the law. I'm sure, Mr. Chairman, you would commit to following the law. But why is it that it's taking the Fed so long to move forward with implementation of 956?
So I like to look at the actual language of the statute when and what it says is it calls on the regulators to make determinations about specific incentive compensation practices that cause excessive risk taking. And then, and we haven't done that. We did, you know, that we put in place pretty serious guidance back in 2010. After putting it out for comment, we looked at all these questions. It's been in place for 14 years. We supervise on it. And, you know, so the question I'm asking is, okay, let's go out and look at what the practices are that are happening now, not that are happening before the global financial crisis when it was obvious that things needed to be changed. And we put the guidance in place. It seems to have largely worked, certainly as it relates to the large firms. And then let's design something that is designed to the residual risk, as opposed to just taking something off the shelf from 15 years ago and doing that. So that, and we're working on that at the Fed now. And again, the statute requires us to prescribe regulations or guidelines to prohibit those things, and I want to do that. In a sense, we have done
just very briefly, and is it your testimony that the Fed has already met the requirements of site? Okay,
no.
Just want to make that clear, and we do look forward to the Fed moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Senator Brett from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair Powell, thank you for being with us today. My colleague from Maryland actually just touched on something, but as I was listening to the exchange from my colleague from Massachusetts and her closing remarks, particularly about Dodd-Frank and 956, there was also a comment at the end where she mentioned you working for giant banks versus the American people. Now, I have a long list of questions I want to talk to you about, but I did want to get you to respond to that.
Yeah, that's completely untrue. You know, the things that we're doing are consistent with our international obligations, and they're meant to be the best thing for the American economy, and that's really our only consideration. We have policy differences across various things, but you know, we're all trying to achieve the best results we can for the people that we serve.
Absolutely, thank you. Chair Powell, I have repeatedly talked about my concern with long-term debt proposal, and just think that it has not been well thought through. First, I have concerns that it blatantly undermines the tailoring requirement, and on that note, do you believe that 2155 will be applicable to the long-term debt requirement?
I think it applies to everything.
Absolutely.
And on the long-term debt requirement, you know, we have voluminous comments that we're looking at carefully and thinking through the process of what to do about them.
No, I appreciate that because I do believe that currently it lacks a real cost-benefit analysis, and I think it really does need serious reconsideration. And additionally, when you take a look at it and its overlapping nature with Basel III, it seems inappropriate that we would move forward with a new long-term debt proposal, finalizing that rule when we don't even really understand what Basel III is going to mean for capital requirements for banks and obviously financial institutions. So my question for you is just that. Would it be inappropriate to move forward with the long-term debt proposal, finalizing that rule prior to Basel III being finalized as well?
I don't know that I would give you, I can't give you a clear answer on that. It will depend. I mean, Basel III won't be finalized for some time, but that's not to say we wouldn't reach a place where people understand and accept and support what it is that we're doing. And I think at that point, we could certainly move forward with other rules.
I heard you mention to one of my other colleagues that probably by the time this all took place, it would be the beginning of next year. I would just say my concern, the Fed has said that the long-term debt rule will directly be impacted by the final Basel product. And so, you know, why would it be inappropriate or appropriate to move forward with that before banks can fully understand what they're facing from Basel? So I would just ask that y'all are thoughtful about that. These are a lot of things that people are dealing with and trying to really understand the implications of. And I think we have seen consistently that people are not taking a look at the cumulative impact of these things and not really taking a look at the trickle-down effect. And on that, on Basel, when you testified in March, you said the Fed was aware and fully considering the potential impacts of a proposal on our commodities markets. And I do want to talk about that. The commodities market, our agriculture industry is 1 in 5 jobs in the state of Alabama. It's 20% of our economy. I am a big believer food security is national security. And the proposal would increase hedging costs by 80%, meaning banks would be far less likely or inclined to offer clearing services. So this could have a detrimental effect to our agriculture community and increase other costs providing food and fiber for our nation. When you look at inputs such as feed, seed, fertilizer prices, those have skyrocketed, and prices have ended up just getting passed down to the consumer. I mean, grocery prices are up 21% since January. So do you believe that the revised Basel proposal will alleviate these concerns that our farmers and our ag community have had about Basel III? And has the Fed done anything specifically to take a look at this? And if not, will you commit to doing so?
So I don't want to get into the specific changes that we're going to make. I'll just say that we're very well aware of and very focused on that particular set of changes and, you know, paying close attention to the issues you've raised.
I appreciate that, and I also hope that the Fed when you craft these types of regulation, you really consider the relationship between the economic impact and the ability of community banks to serve their communities as well. I have heard you mention that to another one of my colleagues, so I know that you're committed to doing that, but that is incredibly important to Alabamians and our main streets all across the state. In my last few seconds, I want to touch on one more topic. So finding solutions to expanding affordable childcare is a top priority of mine. And it is something that I know a number of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle share an interest in and believe is an important issue as well. So Chair Powell, do you believe that increasing access to affordable childcare would positively impact labor participation in our country?
I do believe that.
Thank you.
Stowe of Nevada is recognized.
Thank you. Excuse me, Chairman Powell, thank you for joining us. And I always appreciate visiting with you in my office as well and your comments. Let me start by a comment you made in the opening. Over the past 2 years, you said the economy has made considerable progress toward the Federal Reserve's 2% inflation goal. Labor market conditions have cooled while remaining strong. Reflecting these developments, the risks to achieving our employment and inflation goals are coming into better balance. And what we know is that since Biden came into office, the United States has added over 15 million jobs. Under President Biden, we had 41 consecutive months of job growth, and you've just said it again here today, that wages are up as well. Average U.S. wages and salaries grew by nearly, 16,700 between January 2021 and April 2024. So would you agree with the statement by our ranking member earlier today that the U.S. has the greatest economy on the planet?
I certainly would.
Let me ask you this. Jumping around, and there's been talks today about the Fed's independence and how important the Fed's independence is. The Wall Street Journal recently reported former Trump administration officials drafted policy options to weaken the independence of the Federal Reserve if President Trump were to be elected in November. Allegedly, former administration officials discussed policy options to erode the Fed's independence to make it easier for a president to impact interest rate decisions or fire the Fed chair at will. Chairman Powell, how important is it that the Fed has independence to provide economic stability and anchor our inflation expectations?
So I think it's actually essential. It's literally essential. And the good news is I think that's pretty broadly understood, and particularly on Capitol Hill, on both sides of the aisle. I believe that people do understand that we need to do our work in a way that's outside the political process to the maximum extent possible. Of course, we need to be accountable and tremendously transparent. If you look at the box in the Monetary Policy Report on central bank independence, it's really a box about transparency. That's the other side. So I think it's really important. I think it's an institutional arrangement that has served the public well. And and I do believe that there's pretty wide support for it.
And you just said it has been intentional and institutional arrangement over the years for this very reason, correct?
Yes, this is a choice that we make, and I think it's countries around the world, advanced economies, have all made this choice effectively, and the results are clear that you now have independent central banks, and you have better anchored inflation expectations, and you have better performance on inflation and better performance in the economy generally, which isn't to say there won't be shocks and crises and that kind of thing.
And then let me touch on a subject that one of my colleagues just talked about, because I was going to ask about this, which is our immigration. In Nevada, immigrants are extremely important for our economy. They're essential workers, doctors, nurses, and teachers in my community. Can you, without getting into other ancillary issues that don't impact what you do, can you talk about and elaborate on how immigration affects the employment rate and why you look at it and for what reason you look at the immigration issue?
So we don't, as you, just to make the point that you made, we don't take a position, we don't comment on immigration policy. We have no responsibility for it. It's not our job. But so we just look at the numbers and we sort of try to assess the economic consequences of immigration. And over the last 2 years, 2 years ago, we had an economy where we really had a labor shortage. And what's happened is we've had a wave of immigration, and many of those people have gone to work and gone to work legally through the asylum process. Not all of them. There's also a group that has not been legally processed, but many of this latest group have been have sought asylum and gone through the process of getting a work permit. So what that means is that employers wanted workers, and there were more job openings than there were people actively seeking work or working, and so now you have a new supply of workers, and they've filled those jobs. So we have a bigger economy, but it's not a tighter economy because labor supply has increased the economic capacity. That's just the arithmetic. That's not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. There are other policy choices that could be made, and they're not for us to make.
When you say greater economy.
A larger economy.
In other words, it has improved the growth of our economy.
Right, the economy grew 3.something percent, 3.4%, I believe, last year. And some part of that was that, as Congressional Budget Office analysis showed, and to many's surprise, there had been a really significant uncounted group of workers coming into the country who had gone to work. And that's part of the story of how the economy managed to grow that much while inflation was coming down pretty sharply. Inflation came down 2 full percentage points during 2023 while the economy was growing at 3.4%. So, and while these people were coming in. So that is part of the explanation for why we had such an interesting and pretty good year in 2023.
Thank you.
Senator Kramer of North Dakota is recognized.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. As always, all of my prep goes out the window with the last question. So on the legal immigration workforce front, and I know this isn't your bailiwick, but the issue of workforce is important to the economy. I would submit to my colleagues, beyond even the people who come here seeking asylum suddenly being available for the workforce,
انتوا متخيلين يا جماعة إن لغاية دلوقتي بقى لهم ساعتين بيسلخوا فيه، ساعتين بيسألوا أسئلة، ساعتين من النقد الجامد جدا، ساعتين ممكن يكون فيها كمان تريقة، ساعتين هو بيحاول يدافع عن نفسه وبيحاول يدافع عن البوليسي أو السياسة اللي مستخدمها. الموضوع على فكرة مش سهل، يعني الموضوع بالنسبة للفيدرالي الاحتياطي مش سهل. كمان بيسألوه على حاجات ملهاش علاقة بالقسم بتاعه، ملهاش علاقة خالص بإدارته للإنفليشن أو إدارته للفيدرالي الاحتياطي.
So I'm just going to make an illustration, and you can comment on it if you'd like. But there's a large generation and transmission utility in North Dakota, rural electric cooperative, Basel Electric, very large G&T, members all over the upper Midwest. And they recently testified in front of the CFTC on Basel III, and they expressed a concern about how operations would be impacted if lending was curtailed or limited in any way. And they gave a real-world example, and I want to just give you that example. Now, remember, this is an electricity supply that we're talking about. It's critical it remains reliable. It's critical that it remains affordable. And part of an electric cooperative's risk management program, of course, is how it buys the fuel that generates the electricity, in this case, natural gas. They may buy natural gas in advance at a fixed price, realizing natural gas is one of those commodities that goes up and down in pretty big swings at times. But they can hedge by buying it at a fixed price for a power plant. And it protects the cooperative financially, since electricity prices, again, follow those spot prices generally. So if spot prices spike, so do electricity prices. However, with a natural gas hedge, the cooperative can generate electricity at a lower fixed fuel cost, protecting itself and its consumers from high prices. It's an upfront cost on the balance sheet between the cooperative and its bank, but it protects the reliability and affordable supply of electricity. I give you that very specific example, not even to mention that the cooperative model itself has some unique qualities about it. If you would like to comment on it, you've already stated that there are going to have to be changes. I just throw that into your box of things to think about, and you're welcome to comment if you'd like.
I'll just say we're well aware of that issue, and I appreciate you bringing it up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, then, I'm just going to speak to this independence issue. I think that the senators that have questioned you on it are correct. I share that concern, as you know, that the independence of the Fed is essential. I have resisted moves within my own party to change it, but those moves are very narrow and not very I don't think, very realistic. And I appreciate you pointing out that from what you can tell, at least on Capitol Hill, we're all pretty much united on that front. Perception does matter. It matters a great deal. And you and I have had discussions over the years on, you were very, you admonished us strongly as Congress to spend what we needed to spend to get through the pandemic and to maintain the economy. I think you were right to do that. You were just as aggressive in not responding to calls to rein it in a little bit when Democrats brought the Inflation Reduction Act and the American Rescue Plan to the forefront, and I think really basically hijacked the economy and put fuel on inflation. But perception matters, and so I would just submit to you, and you haven't said you're going to do this. I don't have any reason to believe you'll do this, but any move to lower interest rates or move interest rates either direction before November 5th could certainly be a bad perception, even if there's a strong push to do that. I know you understand that, but I just want you to know that as long as you remain independent, I'll be on your side. I think neutral is a good place to be. And by the way, you have one of those jobs where being boring is one of the most noble things you can be. So great job. Thank you.
We do our best.
Thank you, Senator Kramer. Senator Warnock is recognized, who is decidedly not boring.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The latest monetary policy report.
زي ما انتم شايفين اخر واحد يعني اخيرا قال كلام كويس عن جيروم باول في السياسة اللي بيتبعها وبيقول له انا في ظهرك وطالما انت شغال بنفس الطريقة دي فانا في ظهرك. خلينا نشوف بقية الناس هتتكلم وتقول ايه.
2022 study published in the Journal of Economic Geography found that for every 10% increase in the housing stock, rents decreased by 1%. We've discussed this issue, particularly the effects of housing supply on housing costs, and we agreed that while the Federal Reserve does not control housing supply, it can help create the environment that encourages the construction of new housing, particularly affordable housing. Chair Powell, how has the Fed been working to foster an environment that encourages home construction, and what, in your view, are the challenges that remain?
So, I mean, in the long run, the absolute best thing we can do for the housing market and for the economy is to sustainably bring inflation back down so that people aren't talking about it anymore. And it's just assumed by everybody in their daily lives that inflation will be around 2%, so we don't need to talk about it, which is where we were for a long time. We want to get back to that. Interest rates can come down then, and the housing market can return to the state it was in before the pandemic, which was to say really tight. We don't have enough housing, and that's not really a monetary policy issue. In the short term, though, I would say tight monetary policy weighs on the housing market. The policy works through interest-sensitive spending, and housing is definitely at the top of the list of interest-sensitive spending. So we understand that we're suppressing, not suppressing, but our higher interest rates have led to lower housing starts and lower activity in the housing market. But we're doing that to get back to 2% inflation for the whole economy, so that the housing market can be on a better foundation.
Well, yeah, and related to that, when you have these high interest rates, of course, you see across the country, but particularly in a state like Georgia, these institutional investors who are coming into the space, and they're buying houses in all cash, boxing out first-time, first-generation home buyers. And, of course, the conditions for them doing that improve to their favor with higher interest rates. Would you agree with that assessment?
I know some of that's happening. I don't know that higher interest rates make it. I mean, some of that's, they're working with...
Well, if you got higher interest rates and you got institutional buyers who can purchase it all cash, doesn't that further...
But they have to borrow the money at higher interest rates. I'm just saying higher interest rates doesn't make their investment any cheaper. And notwithstanding, I understand it's a sensitive issue, and in most markets, it's still a pretty small portion of the outstanding housing stock, but it's not an issue. It's not an issue for us. They're a legal buyer of housing. Our job is really the whole economy. I mean, it's more of a question for legislatures.
So how can the Fed better deploy its monetary tools to ensure that we are meeting key inflation objectives like housing affordability?
You know, I think the best thing we can do is kind of what we think we've been doing, which is to move carefully as we think about loosening policy and make sure that once that we do that, when we've got greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably down toward 2%. We're also keeping a close eye on the labor market, and if we see unexpected weakening there, then we could respond to that too. But that's really the best thing we can do for the whole economy and very specifically for the housing market too.
You well point out that you're limited in terms of your influence there, and there is a role for Congress to be sure, which is one of the reasons I wanted to be on this committee to introduce a down payment toward Equity Act with my colleague Senator Butler. This bill would help first-generation home buyers compete with Wall Street institutional investors by helping with down payment costs, closing costs, and costs to reduce interest rates. I look forward to continuing productive conversations with you and looking at how we can make housing more affordable for all Americans. I'm running out of time here, but one of the other concerns that I maintain is with respect to reducing the racial wealth gap is this issue around home appraisals. And the Fed is part of the interagency task force on property appraisal and valuation equity. What expertise and perspective has the Fed brought to this task force? You know, how are you responding to this issue of home appraisals?
So, as you know, we've been an active participant in that task force, and we bring all of the expertise we have in the housing market as well as regulatory, supervisory, and economic expertise generally as we look at that. And I'll also say that our strongly held view is that discrimination has no place in the banking system, and that includes appraisals and other valuations.
I agree with that, and quickly, I was glad to see that CFPB and other agencies recently finalized a rule that creates strong anti-discrimination standards for automated home evaluations. The Fed has not yet approved this rule. Why not, and does the Fed plan to do so?
Sorry, why do we?
You've not yet approved the rule that was made, that was suggested by the CFPB. They finalized the rule.
But do we? Sorry. I'm not aware that it's a rule that we have to finalize too. Is that the case?
That is my understanding.
Let me follow up with you on that. I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Daines of Montana is recognized.
Chairman, thank you. Chairman Powell, thanks for being here today. Certainly, it's not lost on anybody here. Election season's in full swing. And so from now until Election Day, my Democratic colleagues in Congress, as well as the Biden-Harris administration, will waste no time attempting to sell a fairy tale to the American people that financially and economically they are better off now than they were almost 4 years ago. When President Biden took office, inflation was at 1.4%. His failed policies drove us to the highest inflation we've seen in 40 years. I can tell you the folks back home in Montana aren't fooled, because in every part of their lives, inflation is not some kind of hypothetical. They see the everyday impacts of the decades-high inflation brought on by the policies of the Biden administration and facilitated by congressional Democrats. The cost of most goods and services across the economy are more expensive than they were in 2020, and that is a fact that no amount of political spin or mental gymnastics can make go away. Here's just a couple of examples. Breakfast cereal. Prices have increased 28% since January of 2020. Gas prices increased 36% from a national average of $2.63 a gallon to $3.58.
بصوا انا عندي برضو مشكله في الموضوع ده. يعني مش كل حاجه حصلت اتجاه الانفليشن او التضخم كانت بسبب جيروم باول، ولكن في جزء كبير، واعذروني في الكلام اللي انا اقوله، في جزء كبير جدا من الموضوع ده بسبب الحاجات اللي اتطبعت، بسبب الفلوس اللي اتطبعت، بسبب الامدادات اللي راحت اماكن كتير واحنا مش عارفين نصرفها على البلد. يعني انا شايف ان الموضوع مش كله بسبب يعني ارتفاع التضخم، ما كانش بسبب جيروم باول. يعني كفايه كميه الشيكات اللي اتطبعت، اكتر كميه دولارات اتطبعت في كل الرؤساء كانت في عهد جو بايدن. فمش معقول ان هو ياخد البليم او ياخد اللوم كله عليه.
It's fiscal imbalance. I couldn't agree more. I've said many times and continue to believe that Washington's culture of reckless spending, of excessive borrowing, is leading us down a very dangerous path by leaving future generations with mountains of debt. And I'm happy to hear you agree with that assessment. Mr. Chairman, given that it's an election year, you're undoubtedly facing immense political pressure to lower rates. Thus far, you've done an admirable job in using the tools at your disposal to fight inflation, and I urge you to continue to be led by data and not calendars or political influence. You said as recently as last week that while things are trending in the right direction, you would need to see further evidence before cutting rates. So here's my question, Mr. Chairman. What specifically are you looking at and looking for as we head into the next FOMC meeting, and how do you factor in this recent labor data and certainly the significant part of that being government
للتضخم
jobs?
والفايدة، هل هينزل الفايدة ولا لا؟
We're looking for two things, really. One is just more good inflation data. And we had quite a lot of good inflation data the last 7 months of last year. Then we had kind of a bump in inflation in the first quarter. And now we've had one good and one very good inflation reading, and we need more good data so that we can be confident that what we're seeing is really, that's where inflation's going, that it's going back down toward 2%. We don't need to see it at 2%. Right now we're at 2.6%. So that's on inflation. On the labor market, to your question, we've seen that the labor market has cooled really significantly across so many measures, and a number of people here today have pointed them out, and the unemployment rate has moved up. You see a labor market that is now pretty much in balance, pretty much where it was in 2019. It's not a source of broad inflationary pressures for the economy now, but it's still a strong labor market. You know, 4.1% unemployment is a very good and historically low unemployment rate. So we have a mandate to support maximum employment, and we also are paying close attention. And if we see that the labor market were weakening unexpectedly, which is to say, you know, more than what we've seen in a material way, if we unexpectedly, then we could also respond to that, because we have a dual mandate, and we now see the two mandates as more in balance than they were a year ago. Really, the focus had to be and was on inflation. Now we need to be focusing on both goals.
Chairman, thank you. I want to get one question on Basel III, and then we will. In March, this committee agreed that it was seriously flawed and need to be completely rewritten. I was encouraged to see reports last month that the Federal Reserve had provided other financial regulations with possible changes to the proposal. My question is, I continue to believe the proposal should be scrapped altogether, but could you share what changes you're planning to make and the status of the ongoing development of the updated proposal?
So we've had extensive discussions led by Vice Chair for Supervision Barr with the FDIC and the OCC. We've made a lot of progress in getting close to an agreement on a set of proposed changes. The work that remains is to agree on a process forward. How are we going to move forward? It is our view institutionally that we need to put the changes out for comment for some period of time so that the public, all members of the public who want to comment, can see them again and comment on them again, and see them in the context of the quantitative impact survey that we did, and that's the right way to proceed. That's how we would ordinarily proceed, and we don't see why we would deviate from that. And this is the conversation we're now having with the leadership of the FDIC and the OCC, and my hope is that we'll be able to come together around a way to proceed forward, you know, very soon. I'd hope we would have done so by now, but I believe we will do so fairly soon.
Thank you for joining us today, Chair Powell. I look forward to working with you to strengthen this economy. For senators who wish to submit questions for the hearing record, they're due 1 week from today, July 16th. To Chair Powell, please submit your responses to questions For the record, 45 days, no more than 45 days from the day you receive them. Thank you for your testimony. The committee's adjourned.
طيب مراجعة بسيطة كده على الماركت، ونبص على الماركت نلاقي ان النهارده جايب اول تايم هاي. تسلا النهارده داخل على ال $263. لو بصينا على سباي هنلاقي ان سباي ماشي سايد ويز، يعني سباي النهارده مش متأثر اصلا بالاخبار او بالكلام النهارده اللي حصل في الماركت، مش حتى متأثر بكلام جيروم باول. والنهارده عملنا اول تايم هاي في السباي، يعني اول يعني اكبر من اعلى، يعني اعلى رقم وصلنا له النهارده هو في السباي. وزي ما انتم شايفين احنا عمالين نوصل لاول تايم هاي اول تايم هاي، مفيش اي تصحيح في الوقت الحالي ليه علاقه بالسباي. فالسباي دلوقتي يعني طالع جامد جدا جدا، وده مش معناه ان احنا هننزل، ولكن لو الاخبار وحشه يوم الخميس والجمعه فممكن الاخبار دي تاثر بالسالب على الماركت، ونرجع على الاقل نشوف ال 245 او ال 239 240 سوري ال 539 او ال 540. فانا شايف من وجهة نظري ان الماركت النهارده ما تاثرش بالسالب في الاخبار او في الاجتماع بتاع الفيدرالي، ولكن الفيدرالي النهارده كل الاجابات بتاعته كانت منطقيه، وكمان الاجابات بتاعته بتعبر على قد ايه هم السياسه اللي اتبعوها نزلت الانفليشن او التضخم من 7 ل 2.5 او 2.6. فهو قال ان احنا منتظر للاثنين وخلاص، الموضوع بقى قريب جدا علشان نبتدي نعمل كات للريت. وده دي كلمه زودت الماركت او خلت الماركت شويه يبقى عنده امل قدام ان يبقى في كات للفايده او يكون في قص للفايده، وبالتالي ده هيكون برضو هيبقى ليه تاثير ايجابي على الشركات والايرادات بتاعه الشركات اللي بتعتمد اعتماد كلي على القروض. اتمنى الفيديو ده يكون عجبكم. ده لايف كده بسيط علشان اتكلم فيه على اللي بيحصل. اشوفكم الحلقه الجايه اللايف الجاي، ولو في اي اسئله يا ريت تسالوها لي وتعملوا لي في الكومنتات، وان شاء الله بكره يبقى في اجتماع تاني وهبلغكم، او ممكن نطلع لايف كمان ونتكلم على الموضوع ده مع بعض. سلام.